I'm just starting us up on YouTube once again. Keep us recording. Okay. Um, so Isola, I was just going to ask you, we were talking about uh, what the policy priorities are for the renters in Rockville and how you were championing that. And what's the state of play with your colleagues on the council? What are the obstacles here?
Although we've done some measures in regards to affordable housing. Um, they have mostly been very long term, like in upzoning, increasing our supply for our focusing on our permitting process. All of these things, I think, are very helpful to build housing long term. But my concern is more immediate with tenants. And just to give some background on the demographics of the city of Rockville, about half of the population are tenants. 46% of those tenants have lived in their home for less than a year. We have acute housing instability. About 53% of all tenants are cost burden, and which means they're spending about a third of their income on rent. And 20% of those tenants are severely cost burdened, and mostly people of color and mostly women um, are severely cost burdened, spending 50% or more on their rent. And so in Rockville, it is very hard to rent, and it's very hard to keep your community together when you have acute housing instability. So that is why my focus, in addition to long-term building housing, we also need to shift our focus to the more immediate issues of rent stabilization and making sure that we are also protecting our tenants with fees, and some other measures as well, which we have done with this recent code update. We did limit the amount of fees, but most of them are not capped, so we can still see um, de facto rent increases with fees as well.
Is there an increasing amount of housing instability among your senior population also in Rockville? Does it, I
Yes,
know it correlates obviously to low income people of color. These are
yes.
traditional correlations, but we're seeing an increase in the overall countywide population of seniors who rent their homes, mostly women. Because men die first, and then what's left is the house, and the house is empty, and they sell the house as a nest egg, and they move into rental housing and they don't realize that their costs are not stable. And so they're on fixed incomes, and their housing costs continue to rise to the point where they get into their high seniors
Mhm.
numbers, and they're realizing that they're not going to be able to stay in their home. Is that something that you're seeing in Rockville?
Yes, that is something we are seeing. The renter pop, the fast one of the fastest growing renter populations is our senior population. Also, one of our fastest growing homeless populations are also seniors. And a lot of it is coming from also like tax increases and folks being on fixed income. Um, it's also just a matter of having the ability to move, right? Because I was working with a senior a few months ago. She was in her 90s. She got 11% rent increase, and she signed her lease because she didn't have any she didn't have anyone to help her move. So she had no choice but to sign that rent increase. And so this is where we need rent stabilization for the majority of our renters, our market rate renters. And you can even see in Prince George's County, I believe their rent stabilization, they have a specific rate for seniors where they're focusing particularly on seniors. And so, and a lot of the housing that we are building in HOC, the Housing Opportunities Commission, we are also focusing on seniors and intergenerational housing that's close by senior housing, because our senior population is one of the populations in greater need.
One of the other impacts of unstable housing, which is very much a policy consideration from people who are on councils, either in the municipalities or in the county council, or in the state, is the impact of housing instability on student academic achievement. Are you able to speak to the population of children or students in school in Rockville and any kind of turbulence you're seeing there? And by the way, the Renters Alliance will be holding a town hall September 2nd, a back to school town hall with County Executive Mark Elrich and others, hopefully from the school district, to talk about housing and academic achievement. But Montgomery County pays half of its annual budget of $8 billion, so almost $4 billion goes to a school district in order to produce productive, happy, healthy, involved, and tax-paying adults. And if you don't do well in school, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And part of not being able to do well in school has to do with the quality and stability of your home. So are you seeing that too, Councilmember Shaw?
Yes, and this is, in fact, one of the major reasons why I will not stop fighting for rent stabilization is because kids need a stable education environment. And one of the studies that was done prior to the Rent Stabilization Act in Montgomery County showed that kids that have to move because of rent increases perform perform worse than if they had a stable environment. And so if we want to talk about having strong schools, if we want to talk about having a great education, a piece of that is also making sure that you in your power are able to pass laws to provide stable housing for families. A lot of the tenants talk about that they will go great lengths to make sure that they don't move so that they can keep their kid in school. And I will also share, as someone who grew up in a rent-controlled apartment that was lifted in my junior year in high school, and what my family went through basically all of their savings so that I could stay in the same public school that I was going to. And so this is one of the reasons why I will just continue fighting for this. This also brings communities together and people feel comfortable in their school. And it also makes sure that people have the same resources and a safety net with their teachers and their school community as well.
One of the narratives that is put forth by those who are skeptical of rent stabilization, even though we believe that we have evidence that shows the otherwise, but they say that the landlord developer industry will not build housing if you regulate them. That includes rent stabilization, good cause eviction, which they declare the sky will fall, the Russians will invade, et cetera, et cetera. But how realistic is that in terms of your colleagues' perception? Is there building going on in Rockville? Is it threatened by this kind of policy improvement? Where are things in terms of development, and what are you hearing from your colleagues?
So first, I just want to take a step back and explain that rent stabilization is not for it will not hurt the majority of landlords, because most of the landlords are doing the right thing. What it will do is put guardrails on the bad actors that are rent gouging. And we don't want those folks in our market anyhow. But it makes sure it makes sure that there is a profit embedded in the policy every single year. And 6% is a lot. That's the estimated cap for Montgomery County.
Some of us would say it's too much. Yeah.
Yes. So just to be clear, that rent stabilization, if you are a landlord doing all the right things, you have a bit of cushion as well to increase rent, and you can increase it every single year. The other thing I want to mention, the rent stabilization bill in Montgomery County, which was the one I was pushing for and continuing to push for in Rockville, exempts new building for 23 years. And if it also make sure that if there's new renovations, you can also get a waiver from the rent cap. There's lots of different ways in which this bill ensures that there is a fair rent and fair profit.
Let me just throw in, council member, just not, I don't know that you support what renders the county's rent stabilization bill or not. Hopefully we can convince you to, if Rockville passes something, it'll be even stronger. But Montgomery County, it was a good step forward. It was not what we wanted, but it was a good step forward. It was progress. We believe, the Renters Alliance believes in some principles that are quite reasonable. One is, as you say, that a landlord has a right to maintain a profit margin and keep up with legitimate expenses. We don't think that that's a 6% rent increase that the council put on it. We think it might be closer to 3 or 4%, maybe 2%. And many, as you say, good landlords really have not raised rents more than 2 or 3% just to keep up with legitimate expenses. No problem there from us. Likewise, you're a big developer, you want to spend $100-200 million on building a new apartment complex, you go right ahead, and we think that you should make your money back and make a profit margin. We don't think it takes 23 years to do that.
Right.
So while we agree with the principle that you absolutely should be able to make your investment back and make a profit margin, we think that the 23 years was arbitrary. It was a bone to the industry for political reasons, and that based on the data we've heard, it's probably closer to 5 or 10 years. But we would also support that if in 5 or 10 years you did not make your money back, show us, and we'll extend the time so that you make your money back and make a profit margin. So all of that has to be reasonable. But the Renters Alliance did not support the 23 years. We do not support the 6%, though we are pleased with the progress of having some kind of guardrails, as you put it. And also, we believe that even small landlords should be responsible landlords and should not be exempted from the rent stabilization bill. But that's
Yes.
the Renters Alliance stump, just FYI.
Thank you for clarifying that. And yes, there's no doubt that the Montgomery County bill was a compromise of a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different voices. I think on average of the 200 something bills across the country that are rent stabilization bills, I think it's more around an exemption of 10 to 15 years. So 23 is a lot more. And then circling back to your question about building housing, I will say that Rockville is experiencing some of the same barriers to building housing that the rest of our region is. We've lost a lot of jobs in our area. The cost of building material is very expensive, thanks to tariffs, what have you. And there's a lot of different market forces that are impacting our entire region. It's not rent stabilization. Yes, in the nation. It's not. And to blame it on rent stabilization, to me, sounds like folks may just not want to be regulated by the market. So I think we have to consider all of the things that are happening within our region. We were hit hard by job cuts. And so we have to work through all of those different issues to build housing. And I say this also being on the HOC and experiencing, which technically is affordable housing developer. And so we're seeing all of these market trends that we have to deal with to be able to build. And Rockville is no different. And so I don't think we should be sharing. I don't think it is just because of rent stabilization that we're having trouble building. And I will say that a healthy housing market is both public and private, because we're seeing a surge in housing from HOC developers and affordable housing developers right now that are able to fill in where private sector is not. And a lot of that housing is affordable. And so I think it's important to make sure that we have a healthy market with private and public.
I think also we hear this a lot in terms of other factors, but land availability and cost is extremely important, as well as interest rates. And as you say, cost of materials and labor. Montgomery County as a whole, in the aggregate, is a high demand market. But in the last couple of years, I mean, certainly in the last year, highly impacted by the tariffs, by the layoffs in the federal government. We have a very large federal government employee population who were severely impacted by the chaos we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. policymakers. That's the nicest I could say. So it definitely has a lot to do with demand. However, with giving due credit to the landlord developer industry as an industry, they don't build tomorrow. They think about things years in advance, develop market research in large chunks. They usually think 25 years in advance in terms of market trends and so on. There's a building complex in downtown Silver Spring called the Blairs. Was started off as a $650 million project, but they started that years ago. And it was in planning for years. And then they, started it slowly but surely. So the idea that rent stabilization that was started 2 years ago suddenly caused this, that, or the other thing. No, these guys don't invest hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars without thinking about it well in advance and planning it. And much more major factors like land availability, demand, the ups and downs of the market, whether or not we're going to have World War III, any of these things are much more of consideration for these big industries. So Grant, and Tyree and Wendy, do you have anything to add to your council member who's here or to us in general on issues in Rockville renting?
Hmm.
Can I just say
Of course.
one more thing? Speaking about the algorithmic ban, that was one measure in the overall update to our landlord tenant code. And that was not an easy vote for me with all of the updates to the landlord tenant code. So there are a few good things with the landlord tenant code. The algorithmic ban, there is some limitation and transparency with fees. But I will also say, we don't have rent stabilization in that update. We also, it also removed one of the major protections that we have as tenants, which was that landlords are required to share any rent increase with the city. So yes, that is in our code right now, that landlords are required to share any rent increase when they share it with the tenant, to also share it with the city. So there is some level of oversight of what is happening and what landlords, how landlords are raising their rent. And so overall, this was a very compromised update, but I am hopeful that we will be able to build on this progress and be able to pass rent stabilization. One of the things that I was asking about is, in the absence of rent stabilization, could we at least on new leases include that the city of Rockville doesn't have rent stabilization? There are a lot of tenants that sign their lease thinking they're in Montgomery County, so they have that protection. I've been in many leasing offices listening to tenants say, you're overcharging me the rent. You're overcharging me because of the 6% rent cap. And we know that in the city of Rockville, landlords can charge whatever they want. So I wanted to share that type of transparency. Unfortunately, I was not able to push that through. But tenants do need to know that, and I think that's really important. So overall, it wasn't easy to vote for this, but I do think this will be a foundation for progress in the future as long as we, as tenants, keep pushing forward.
I was going to say it ain't over till it's over. Grant, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add that on a high level, you know, being a renter in Rockville and the county at large, there is a real sea change that is happening where the now in Rockville, I think just about half of our population lives in rental housing. 20 years ago, that was far lower. I believe like 10 or 15%. And at the same time, you have more and more people that are living in housing that are vulnerable to exploitation by these massive publicly traded investor focused companies. And when we get out and talk to the majority of people about this issue, even homeowners, they're appalled. They want to see these kinds of protections put in place because they recognize what a drain it is on a community to have people turn over year over year over year, to have people living in fear of that kind of retaliation or that kind of, having that kind of economic hammer come down on them. And so the biggest challenge I think we have is not so much convincing people the ideas are good, but it's being able to get to enough people to tell them about the ideas. But luckily, in the last year, the media coverage on this issue has been, on all of these issues, renter issues, has been phenomenal and growing. The amount of door knocking and the capacity that we've had has been growing as more and more people come in and want to help. So there is a real sea change coming here that's driven by the fundamental dynamics that are shifting how people choose housing and what housing looks like for people for potentially their entire lives.
Wendy?
Yeah, my thoughts are that we have to. I have to admit, I really wasn't that concerned about housing on the whole until recently, right? I think we have to make sure we're talking to everybody about this, like we talk about the price of gas. You're at the store and you bring up, the housing issues, or I don't. We have to find a way to make it part of regular conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to do that. I often go to the store. I wear kind of a provocative phrase on my chest. I mean, on my shirt, so, and there are people who talk to me. Sometimes it's a little rude, whatever, but people stop and talk to me, or they'll go, I have one that says Stop Moms for Liberty, and too many people don't know who they are. But people will stop and say, who is that? What are you talking about? And that gives me an opportunity to open other doors. And I didn't know to do that. So I'm in my late 60s and I figured this out. So how do we get me when I was 30 to figure it out? Or, 30-year-olds now.
Well,
that's what we need to do.
A big stick, I think, is important.
Yes.
Tyree, any words?
No, I think that everybody covered, and I don't want to belabor their point.
Well, then let me just say also, first of all, that about the messaging, which is important. As say, way back when, I started to sound like the old man in the old institution, but we started this when there was no organized voice for renters anywhere in the state of Maryland. There were some organizations that did some of this work, so I don't want to take anything away from our allies who had part of their mission to deal with housing in some way, but there was no organization saying, hey, wait a second, we are going from 20% of Maryland to nearly 40% of the entire state who are now living in rental housing, not as a station on the way to owning, but as a permanent way of being housed. So we were the first to come along, and literally it was just me behind a curtain with some volunteers. Now we have a full-time staff. Now we have Renters United Maryland, a coalition statewide. Now we have the terrific work of Rockville Renters United, which is exactly the kind of thing that we wanted to see growing in all of these local municipalities. Because, Wendy, as you point out, My background before I got started in the Renters Alliance and nonprofit leadership was press and communications. And when I started this, it was about getting housing to be something that was covered in the press. And it was about as sexy as a cinder block. But as time went on, people began to realize, as we began pushing the message out, as all of you are doing, talking to your neighbors, holding community meetings, talking to the press, as Grant Sams has been recently been made famous in the last a few days, talking to the local press. That's how it works, where we realize that housing is not just a common commodity. You know, whatever you can pay for, can't afford it, well, you don't have a house. That's not housing. That may be pocketbooks and fancy sneakers, but housing is direct and stable, affordable, quality housing is directly related to the health, welfare, and prosperity of our communities. And so it's not a common commodity, and people are beginning to see again that that kind of housing is absolutely necessary. And because we don't have enough of it, we're having a national crisis. And so, as Brian Frosch, the former Attorney General, used to advise me all the time, never let a good crisis go by without taking full advantage. So we are getting that message out. And now housing affordability is a national topic and certainly a topic of all of the campaigns, but it will fade if we don't keep ourselves on it. And I'm so glad to see all of you doing that. Let's continue on. We can kibitz also about Rockville as we go. We're not completely done, but let's move on to Gaithersburg, which is a companion municipality, which I have to say is a little bit behind Rockville in terms of its community progress in getting the Gaithersburg City Council to support the kinds of policies that we'd like to see. But it is growing in its activism. And our man, David Mullins, who lives up there with his wife, Lindsay, have been very active with their neighbors. So David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And yeah, that's a helpful top line sum up. But and it was nice to hear, from folks in Rockville, because there's just a lot of overlap in challenges and goals as far as the renter population goes. So it was good to hear all that, and then I'll just kind of build on top of that a little bit, and also mention that we've got Josh here too, who's a Gaithersburg resident, and would love to hear if he has anything to add. But I was just going to give a couple updates about what the mayor and council have been up to landlord-tenant wise. But then I do want to come back to what Matt was saying with the growing advocacy here that we're seeing. Just like Councilmember Shaw just said about Rockville, where they did their landlord-tenant code update, Gaithersburg engaged in that in Chapter 13 of their code. About a year and a half ago, they started, I think, the process, and that was done earlier. And one highlight of that is definitely worth noting that this fee transparency idea on the front end, which Councilmember Shaw touched on there, that if you're coming in to a leasing office, you need to know what the real rent is going to be. This was introduced at the state level after Gaithersburg passed it. I don't think it happened there, so it's good to hear Rockville did it. But that was something that Gaithersburg was a leader in. I want to acknowledge for sure that was part of the landlord-tenant code update. Otherwise, a lot of what Zola was saying there was cleaning up to do, updating on state law and things, and as part of that, and yeah, so then jumping over to rent stabilization, which most certainly was not in that update. I think that's kind of what Matt was talking about, maybe as far as our government being a little behind on this issue, and because we have, as Councilmember Jamil Hernandez from Gaithersburg was on our town hall a few weeks back, and he basically summed it up that the votes aren't there for any form of rent stabilization, and that's essentially true. The Mayor Judd Ashman controls the agenda. And he's very outspoken about his opposition to rent stabilization, even authored a letter to the county when they were going through the rent stabilization legislation process that a majority of the now council members signed with him, opposing that law, that action. And so he's certainly not going to putting it on the agenda anytime soon. And then we don't have a majority of the council to direct staff or create a public hearing for that. But despite that, we've still seen a small but mighty and very active core of folk renters in Gaithersburg who have been coming out, and allies too, coming out to still tell the mayor and council that we need rent stabilization all through that code update process and into the present time. And so it's really heartening to see that going on. And then but then we've even seen that coalesce then recently, some of this activism into what Grant was describing in Rockville as our tenant associations trying to come together to form a broader tenant union to talk about common concerns and create a forum and for more power, but then also to a larger tenant, we can hear more of what's going on in our communities and things. So I'd say just over the last year or so, that's been forming, and it's been great to see the Gaithersburg Tenant Union. They're calling themselves, and so it's been with. I do want to definitely mention thanks to Rockville Renters United, who have been very supportive. Grant, I think Zola too have come to maybe some of the early meetings to explain what's been working for them and show solidarity. That was just really outstanding. And so yeah, with them, of course, Renters Alliance has been offering support, Progressive Maryland, and then we've had Housing Justice Montgomery, some folks from Gateway where I live have connected us there. So it's the small group that I said is actually growing now, and that group has been advocating before the mayor and council for things beyond rent stabilization too. They've been keeping that core message, not letting that drumbeat go for sure, because the gouging is legal without it, certainly, and that's just unacceptable. But then taking a look at things like the budget and just pushing for better landlord-tenant enforcement, even drawing on data from Rockville about how much they spend on that sort of thing. Because through having these broader meetings, the tenant leaders were finding that that people were either, things we know at the county level, afraid to report issues because they're afraid of retaliation, or then not getting a proper response. But then maybe even just at a little worse scale, where we're just at least in the county, you can count on some initial response, maybe from the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs on certain things, but that just is not what we were hearing on the ground. And just certain complaints just not really, just kind of falling off the shelf, or things like that. And so kudos to the people that testified. They really tried to bring a constructive solution. They found the budget line item, said here's where we need more money, and unfortunately they were ignored essentially. But definitely in policy, in that the city manager basically came in and said, "Nope, we heard you. We're spending the same thing. Status quo is fine as it is," which is very much not what they were saying in their testimony. But they were acknowledged by some council members, certainly their efforts. And then to come back on that, some of that acknowledgement by the council members, like I'm glad Rockville was claiming their victories. A lot of these things that were getting updated with that, even though rent stabilization is off the table, are due to the fact that these tenant advocates are pushing so hard for rent stabilization, and then not just putting blinders on, but also then actively engaging with the other things that are being brought up. So like I said, when we had Councilmember Hernandez on recently, he mentioned that like Rockville, they're going to tie to their licensing process this requirement for rent increase data, essentially opening up the rent rolls to the city, and part of that to the public. And then so I think he's looking to go a little farther with a few more inputs than Rockville did. There are going to be work sessions on that coming up. He let us know. But again, there's just, if you have the information, I think it certainly doesn't hurt. But we want to know what's being done with that.
David, if I could just jump in on that point, I meant to mention that to Councilmember Shaw in Rockville. I find it very disturbing when any government body eliminates the ability to collect data. And so there's something wrong. Why would you want to hide that data? Why wouldn't you want it available to you as a policymaker to be able to know what the reality is? I will say Jamil Hernandez had come to us because he does want to put forward some legislation, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but when he spoke to me about it, that he wanted to, he was wishy-washy on rent stabilization, but he said, show me the data and we'll see whether or not we need it. And I said, all right, well, we're certainly pro data at the Renters Alliance. And if you're going to go and find out apartment by apartment what the rents are and what the increases are, that would be helpful to get a realistic picture of what people are facing. But it would not be sufficient. I advised him that if you found that 95% of folks didn't really get a significant rent increase each year, that doesn't mean that the 5% who do shouldn't be protected. I always say, if you obey the law, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have one. It just means that you're not going to have to worry about the law. So anyway, I do hope that Rockville rethinks the data collection issue, because having accurate data is central to good policymaking.
I just
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, so we are doing a data collection, but it won't be as thorough as what we currently have. They are asking, it's similar to Gaithersburg, they are asking landlords to share an overall average of rent when they're doing their license. But that is different than at the time of increasing rent or in advance of actually having an offer, sharing that, or in advance of having a signed lease, sharing the offer that you are sharing with the tenant to the city. Because that allows the city, if they wish, or if they have the ability to do so, to mitigate. At least it provides an opportunity to mitigate if it's a. And also, what I was saying is when if the landlord wants to rent gouge and they have to share that amount that they're rent gouging the tenant with the city, that is also a preventative measure in some cases. And so taking that away, that was one of the strongest protections that we had. And I don't think the way in which they're planning to collect data will have the same type of protections that we have right now in the code.
Yeah, it served a little bit as a deterrent if you could be publicly embarrassed by gouging, for sure. But anyway, David, go ahead.
Well, that's really helpful there, because I think to his credit, Councilmember Hernandez is hoping to get that particular gouge in your example or have to put it on record and tie that to the relicensing. But I as has come up already, I think it is. I think he's a good faith actor, our council member, in doing this. The problem I have is that sometimes when, like folks have mentioned, when averages start to come up, there's a chance the public will, and people, bad faith actors will help the public try to think that the average speaks for it all. And so that's, but it's been good that the folks that have been testifying in Gaithersburg have been really clear that that a gouge is even just a one time. This is why you need guardrails. One, shouldn't be allowed. And then not only should it not be allowed, but having that as a tool, Councilmember Shaw brought this up a lot, is also unacceptable. There's a 2-year lease requirement now. I think it's shored up in Rockville and in Gaithersburg too, that you need to offer a 2-year lease. But if you're not if you're not stabilizing the rent either through rent stabilization or for the 2 years, then the landlord still has the threat of a gouge for the term that they don't want you to pick, right? So you're kind of steered into one term. So like the other protections, can still, even with them having that tool and as a landlord, can be a problematic. But yeah, to come back to it, that was that those are some upcoming things in work sessions. And then, like I said, the Gaithersburg Tenant Union will continue meeting, and I'm sure they're not going to let it go, that they want to see more landlord-tenant enforcement, because I'll just put one last thing here on, but I want to also lift up that I was glad to hear some of the day-to-day experience, Matt, of the Rockville renters you were asking about. There's good faith landlords and property managers out there. There's good relationships that happen, and I always love hearing that, because that is more often than not, and we wish it was the norm. But we are, so I help with the Gateway Tenants Association, where we're at the Gateway Apartments, which is the largest apartment multifamily in Gaithersburg. And unfortunately, we have a lot of good good actor landlords in Gaithersburg. In fact, I think I see one of them on the attendee list here even. But yeah, we also just don't. And unfortunately, where we rent, we have a view of one of these companies that is acting in bad faith sometimes. And so we have code enforcement that is on site in Gaithersburg. We've experienced that in others. We even had an inspection recently. When something severe is reported to code, I think they're very responsive. That's been our experience. But what we're missing is kind of a more administrative approach when you have a problem property. And so I'm just, again, want to lift up, we've got a good group of folks pushing to improve that through the budget. And then, of course, just pushing for the real protections we need on gouging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always amused to hear folks say we don't need a law because only a few people are abusing the other people. And, that's the laws are not for the majority, they're for that minority who are abusive. We didn't get the 10 Commandments because everybody was behaving. So, this is how that's supposed to work. It's a ridiculous argument. And we're always glad that the majority are not going to be affected by laws. Hopefully, most of us won't murder anybody. But for those who do, there's a law that says you can't do that, and there are consequences. Do we have any questions or comments in the chat that we need to address? My staff who's been paying attention.
There was an earlier question asked when Grant was talking right at the beginning about what the average Rockville renters are seeing in terms of one-bedroom rent rates.
Yeah, something we sort of try to keep an eye on is rough averages. We don't have the capacity to do a full-on study, but it depends significantly what part of town that you're in and if you have access to the Red Line or not. Generally, the further north, it's a little bit cheaper. Right now, it's going about 1,900 at the low end to, oh goodness, 2,500 plus, I believe, in like when you get really far down toward like Pike and Rose.
Montgomery County's average is 1,725 to about 2,100 for a one-bedroom. So as we've been pointing out all evening, that's an overly aggregated average. It entirely depends on what Grant's saying, where you live. We've seen apartments as low as $1,200 or whatever, but we've seen them also right up the street from me. They built affordable housing at $3,000 to $5,000 for a one-bedroom per month. Wow. So I'm not sure that the average helps us, but that is according to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Okay, any other comments or questions in the chat that we should address?
Well, I was going to just do one. Oh, Tim, you want to lift up that one there, and then I'll go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, sure. There's a question in the chat. Can you explain the new law signed by Governor Moore starting October 1st? That landlords can't use credit scores to determine eligibility for rent from/with them.
Well, unless somebody's an expert on that, I can only dip my toe into it because we did testify, and I can't remember what we testified, but I do remember the principle behind it, which was that we wanted to strengthen the idea that source of income should not be discriminated against. And if you had a low score, chances are you might be on a housing voucher or have had some kind of eviction or financial situation in the past. But what is the landlord's reasonable interest? The reasonable interest is to determine whether or not you have a steady enough income to pay the rent. And so that was the primary principle behind it. And just having a low score could be impacted by any number of things. And there was a concern that it was being used by some landlords to target those who would likely have a low score because they are low income and likely to be associated with being on a voucher. But we can get more details to you, Evelyn, on that. But that's as far as I know, unless somebody else knows more. Anybody?
We did testify for a bill that would have been specifically for people presenting, I think, a subsidy, because the idea being that why are you even running the score? That it is like a full voucher here. But I'm not aware of anything that would limit that in market. But we're glad to follow up.
Yeah, happy to follow up with you, Evelyn. All right. Well, let me just first of all thank our tenant activists and my staff also who are tenant activists, but certainly the folks over at Rockville Renters United. We lifted them up and honored them at our last building community celebration for good reason, because they were a model of what we'd like to see across the state and across the nation, frankly, of tenants acting like neighborhood associations, saying that their homes and their neighbors and their neighborhoods are important to the overall health of our entire society. And they were doing an excellent job of that. I tell you, it was right out of, if renter activism could be painted by Norman Rockwell, the picture of having the Rockville Renters United testifying with a completely diverse group of people, young and old, middle class, lower class, whatever you want to call it, everybody was testifying, and eloquently too. It was really quite something, quite a model for the rest of us. So we really congratulate you. We also are sympathetic because we know your work is nowhere near done. So onward you go. And of course, we thank the champion and celebrate and salve her scars from the fight that she has had and she will have going forward. But thank you, Councilmember Azola Shaw, for your championing, and we will do all that we can. Rent stabilization may not have the votes today, but it might have it tomorrow. So that door is not shut. It's just a little bit difficult to open right now, but we're all working on it and support you in that effort. Now I'd like to turn to our staff. Go ahead, David.
I left one thing out on the municipal front.
Yeah.
I last note here, so sorry. The one state law that did pass is the eviction notice law in the last session, that there now 6 days, a minimum of 6 days before an eviction is going to happen. A tenant, the landlords are required to give the tenant a notice with the date of eviction on there. This is a new thing. Tenants didn't used to know the date. So in Montgomery County, the law allowed counties to extend that time period. So now in Montgomery County, the county council has extended that to the max, which is 14 days. So now in Montgomery County, you get a minimum 14 days notice with this eviction notice. Rockville, please correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember, but Rockville also extended to 14 days almost immediately after. And then, but Gaithersburg has not taken any action on this. So if you live in Gaithersburg, you're still just getting a 6-day notice is the requirement. Could come earlier, but that's the minimum requirement. And we just checked with Tacoma Park, and there's a proposal on the table to extend to 14 days, has not passed yet. So also in Tacoma Park, you're looking at a 6-day state law there.
And that's a good segue over to, sorry, Azola, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add with that, and I'm advocating for amendment for ours to ensure that when, just like the county, that when there is an eviction, that the landlord notifies the county. And I want to make sure that in Rockville, the landlord also notifies the city when there's an eviction, just to provide more opportunity to help mitigate for the tenant.
Right. So let me segue quickly over to Tacoma Park just with a quick update. Tacoma Park had the first rent stabilization program, I think, in the state of Maryland, something that County Executive Mark Elrich was a council member who championed back then. But they are now reviewing their rent stabilization program. They've engaged a study. The study is going to be looking at capital improvement pathways, utility transfers, rent ceilings and floors, exemptions, unit-based exemptions, exemptions on deed-restricted units, and exemptions on new construction. And the Renters Alliance is paying close attention to that, along with our colleagues in Tacoma Park, who are very active with some concern as to what the motivation is behind the study. But we have also heard from the city council in Tacoma Park that they very much support rent stabilization. They just want to see if it needs any improvement. Don't like those words because we think it's actually pretty strong. But nevertheless, they're looking at it and they're studying it and intend to get back to it in November. And we will keep everybody updated on that. The Renters Alliance is working closely with Tacoma Park Housing to help do what we do countywide. To form tenants associations in Tacoma Park and to educate renters and landlords about their rights and responsibilities. So we'll be very active in that community as well. So with that, again, thank you to everybody. We have a duty to also do our regular information, which informing people about what available resources there are in the county. So I'm going to turn to Jackie to moderate that piece, and then we'll close out. Jackie?
Thank you so much, Matt. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good evening, everyone. First, I'm going to go ahead and explain the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs, or OLTA, which is charged with informing the public of their general rights and responsibilities of tenants and landlords. And they also help to resolve disputes amicably. OLTA provides several resources, including the Landlord-Tenant Handbook, which outlines the basic rights and responsibilities of tenants and landlords, ordinary wear and tear booklet, information regarding the eviction process, including eviction prevention, rights of those that rent rooms, sample leases, sample notices, and termination leases. A tenant organization, or a landlord who believes there's been a violation of landlord-tenant law is free to file a complaint with the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs. They will then investigate the complaint and provide mediation. However, before filing a complaint, please try to work out your issue with your landlord first. Complaints can be filed online at the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs website or in person at the DHCA office in Brockville, Maryland. You could also call 311 if you just have a general question that you would like to ask the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs. Okay, I am now going to pass it on to Cyrus Schiller, our outreach coordinator, to talk to you about housing code enforcement.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, and thanks everyone for your wonderful talk tonight. But yeah, to also just piggyback off of something Jackie said, anytime there's an issue in the building or in the unit, always contact the property manager or landlord first and document the responses. And just if it's been more than a reasonable amount of time, and this is for code enforcement, by the way. So anytime there's a maintenance issue in the unit, like the air conditioner, or in the building, like an elevator, like these are really important things. If you've contacted your landlord or property manager and they haven't responded in a reasonable amount of time, you can always file a complaint with the Office of Code Enforcement for DHCA. This can be done online or by dialing 311, the non-emergency number, and just making a service request. And it can be anonymous if you wish. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Tim, if you can go ahead and explain to us about Office of Rent Stabilization.
Yeah, so in Montgomery County, there's rent stabilization. So if your building is at least 23 years old, there is a cap on how much landlords can raise your rent every year. This year, the maximum allowable rent increase is 5.2%. And if you're not under rent stabilization, then there's no limit. However, if there's an egregious rent increase, you can always reach out to the Office of Rent Stabilization and file a complaint and see if they will negotiate with the landlord on your behalf. Another thing to note is that your rent can only go up once every 12 months. This is for every unit in Montgomery County. And they have to give you 90 days notice in writing before it takes effect. There are also designations that your building might have to see if it's troubled or at risk. We can put the link in the chat. But if your building is under those designations, then they can't increase the rent. And as we've been talking about this whole evening, rent stabilization doesn't apply in all of everywhere. Cities of Gaithersburg and Rockville don't have it. Tacoma Park has their own rent stabilization. So if you live in those cities and have questions, you can reach out to your local office. There's also fees that are regulated under rent stabilization that are allowable. There's optional amenities they can charge for those, but they can't charge for required amenities, or they regulate what they can charge for required amenities, such as lockout fees, pet fees, parking, and things like that. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. We can always look through your lease and see if the fees are legal. You can also create a complaint through the link that we'll put in the chat soon.
And where we put the links in the chat to Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs, Code Enforcement, and Rent Stabilization. And those pages on the Department of Housing Community Affairs website have all kinds of details about these laws So if you want to get into it, Jackie.
Thank you. All right, and finally, we're going to have our new Maryland Service Year intern first introduce herself and then tell us about access to counsel and eviction. Go ahead, Elfaz.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Elfaz. I'm originally from Ethiopia, and I'm a new Maryland Service Year intern. And I would like to present about how to access to counsel and evictions program. A landlord cannot evict a renter in Maryland without getting a court order and scheduling the eviction through the sheriff's department. For a tenant to qualify for a free lawyer, they must be a renter living in Maryland and have household income at or below 50% of Maryland's median income. ACE assists with the following cases, such as failure to pay rent, breach of lease, tenant holding over, voucher or other subsidy terminations, and lawyer might also help if the landlord is pressuring the tenant to move, for example, by illegally shutting off all utilities. You can get a lawyer by calling 211 or any of the numbers that we will also provide in the Zoom chat. And the Maryland Legal Aid phone number is 888-465-2468. The CASA Legal Service phone number is 866-765-2272. The Community Legal Service phone number is 240-391-6370. If you need any the same day legal service, you can also walk into the district court help center, or which is located around the second floor for the district court, or you can also call 301-563-8800. Thank you.
Well done, Elfaz. Thanks, Jackie. I want to again thank everybody for joining us this evening. This was recorded on YouTube. But one message that kept coming to us over and over again was about getting active in your community. And there's one thing that we urge everyone to do. The Renters Alliance is a 501c3. We can't tell you who to vote for or who to vote against, but we can tell you to do one thing that's very important. Can't we, Pat? Go on. Timing.
Well, we have until November the 3rd of this year. That gives you plenty of time to do research and find out which legislators care about renters. Matt mentioned tonight about one legislator who held up a just cause bill, and that's very important. So please do your research and vote when you can vote. It's very important.
And if you'd like, I'm a renter and I vote button, then just email us and tell us your address. We're happy to send one to you.
And also, if you'd like us to come to your building and help you set up a tenants association, we'll be glad to do it, because we really believe there's strength in numbers.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks to everybody. And with that, good night.
Good night.